alternative experience.
The alternative experience.
The alternative experience.
Hey everybody, Nicky Joe here. Welcome to another episode of Alternative Experience, episode 40 or 41. We're cooking with gas. So, how you doing? So today I want to talk to you about a subject which is a little bit personal, but do you know what? I need to tell people about my journey to inspire them to take their own action. And it's all about how I finally cured my incurable IBS and chronic acid reflux completely naturally, and actually found my true calling in the process. Some of you may have heard part of that story. It might be new to all of you, but I'll keep it as concise as I can. But if anyone ever tells you that you talk out of your arse, own it. It's completely true. We all do. And that's because the journey from your mouth right the way through to your anus is one continuous tube. Now, that's a useless piece of information, but a fun piece of trivia to use at Christmas around the table. Okay, maybe not. Anyway, as someone that suffered from an absolute litany of sort of digestive imbalance, over the last 8 years, I've really gotten to know my digestive system intimately. Now, from around 2009, I had suffered with chronic acid reflux. Now, I initially just put this down to my usual weekend shenanigans. Like a lot of people in my 20s and my early 30s, I hadn't settled down and started a family, and I worked extremely hard during the week, and weekends were the time that I invariably let off some steam. Now, when we did, we used to go hard. We'd drink, smoke, sometimes take things further, and I actually lost count of the amount of times that Sunday would roll around, and despite my extreme hunger, I would actually be incapable of eating. And that was often due, I don't know if anyone else has ever had this, due to damage to like the roof of my mouth. Again, no doubt from smoking, drinking, and whatever other substances may have passed down that esophagus in the previous 48 hours. Now, I'm not saying any of this to brag. It's not big, it's not clever, but it was bloody good fun. And at the end of the day, it contributed to who I am today. So we can't change it. You might as well embrace it. Now, at the time, I really did sort of view the acid reflux as kind of just a byproduct of the fun that I was having, and one that I continued to kind of put up with for a good few years. And it was a constant battle between my stomach acids and the litres of Gaviscon and the packets and packets of Rennie that I was invariably consuming. Now, for anyone that hasn't ever suffered with acid reflux, it's basically when your stomach acids, they escape from the depths of your belly and they make their way up your digestive tract, and then they set up camp right at the back of your throat. Now, to emphasize that problem, you literally have highly corrosive hydrochloric acid basically squatting in your throat. It's not nice at all. Now, I do actually have a visual representation of this. Don't worry, it's not graphic. I did a video on YouTube a while back just using hydrochloric acid and a dirty patio that I was cleaning, just to demonstrate how corrosive this stuff is and why it's such a problem if you do have, obviously, acid reflux on a regular occasion. I'll put the link in the description on that one. Now, in 2015, after suffering from kind of a prolonged high stress event, my symptoms worsened. Almost every single day was kind of spent fighting these awful symptoms, to be quite honest, until eventually I ended up in hospital with something called gastritis. Now, that's a stress-related illness in which your stomach lining becomes chronically inflamed, irritated, and then eventually infected. Now, although I was already a good few years into my sort of stomach problems, this is actually when the beginning of my real gut issues began, I think. Now, 6 weeks after being in hospital, I contracted something called Campylobacter, and that's a strain of food poisoning linked to chicken. Now, this is extremely common after gastritis, but this was a fact that my doctor neglected to tell me about. Really do appreciate that. Now, as a result of that unfortunate oversight, I actually became an extremely rare statistic. Now, let me explain. The above is not uncommon. Each issue on their own is obviously suffered by millions of people worldwide. There's a true epidemic of people suffering with acid reflux, digestive imbalance, stress, gastritis, and of course food poisoning. It's not I wasn't a sort of a rare statistic there. However, it's a very rare breed that gets to suffer each of them one after the other in such quick succession. And as a result, the rare group that I now become an involuntary member of was basically, there's only a handful of people diagnosed with this extremely rare and, to be honest, completely destructive form of post-infectious IBS. Now, obviously, I'm going to save on the details. I'm going to be polite. But let's just say this condition, when it's active, which is quite regularly, it's completely destructive. You can't go anywhere through fear of an accident. And for at least 7 to 10 days at a time, you're going to be regularly running to the toilet to release hell for maybe 2 seconds, to be cut short and forced to endure the worst constipation imaginable. It's awful. I won't go into any more detail, but let's just say my B-day became my very, very best friend. So then there is obviously the anxiety. Rarely does an hour go by when the thought of this doesn't pop into your mind, especially when you're out and about running errands. You're not sort of sat in the comfort of your own home. And that obviously consumes you, which no doubt I think probably only increases the likelihood of a flare-up. It's actually mental torture. I hated every second of it. Now, I was encouraged to find that in some very rare cases, with some lifestyle tweaks and obviously an understanding of the condition itself, it could be managed. But at that point, it wasn't good enough for me. I mean, I was in my mid-30s and I wasn't happy with that. I wanted it gone. So I decided to hit the books and deep dive my condition. It was kind of a challenge accepted moment. Now, I scoured PubMed, NCIB, all of the medical libraries in sort of an attempt to try and address my issues, yet none of the approaches that I was finding seemed to sort of work. Now, I tried kefir, pre-probiotics, low histamine diets, vegan, paleo, keto, non-dairy, gluten-free, all of the fad diets. And admittedly, at times, I would go for sort of maybe 4 or 5 weeks completely symptom-free alongside these new protocols, thinking, yes, I've got it sort of solved, and then it would just come back with absolute vengeance, and that would kind of stop me in my tracks. Then in 2017, I started taking CBD, and this actually instantly cleared up my acid reflux. Now, to this day, I have no idea, was it the CBD that did it? Was it the natural peppermint that kind of accompanied it? But I didn't care. I was glad to see the back of the acid reflux. It woke me up so many times in the middle of the night. I just knew it was one less thing to worry about, so on I cracked. Unfortunately, it didn't affect the IBS in any way at all. I was hoping that it would, and that's why I started taking it, because I wanted to calm the anxiety and see if that would benefit, but it didn't. So I began to go extremely deep into the gut, the microbiome, the gut-brain connection, and that's where I got obviously the qualifications from, and that's where my fire was really lit within me. Not only was I desperate to really cure what I was suffering with, I was also beginning to realize that I had a really deep interest in the subject matter. Now, I suppose for a bit of added context, my mind works in a pretty strange way. Now, I've mentioned before, if anyone's listened to the podcast, I am pretty certain that I sit somewhere on the spectrum. I'm what you would call anal. I do like detail, and as such, I'm never really satisfied just being told something works. I need to understand how. I need to be able to sort of see a picture of everything, its mechanism of action, how it feeds into whatever process that it's part of. And I'll give you an example of that. In previous sort of work environments, I was always the newbie sort of asking why we did certain things, not to question management, but just to understand obviously how and why we did these, how they fed into further processes. So I had a complete picture. And when it came to learning about the human body, I quickly found that I had this really, really voracious appetite for the subject matter. I was reading research papers till late in the night. I was kind of jumping out of bed in the mornings to resume that. And it really, as I say, it lit this fire in me. It really did get some passion going. Now, I was spending so much time researching that whenever I saw anybody that I knew, like any of my friends, family, I just really found myself passionately talking about the subject until I suppose the penny finally dropped, and I thought, this is something I want to pursue, even if it's just as an official interest, a side hustle, or potentially a professional way forward. It was my job that I was unhappy that had led me into the condition in the first place. That was my initial imbalance. And this kind of had the potential to to kill two birds with one stone. Now, over the next 3 years, I qualified in multiple areas: medicinal cannabis, the endocannabinoid system, the gut-brain connection, plant medicine, advanced anatomy and physiology. And each of these was actually a standalone 2-year course. It should have taken me sort of 6 to 8 years to do all of those courses with the breath work as well. Yet I completed all of them within 3 years. It was literally, it's all I focused on. It was my full-time job to an extent. Now, all of this was great, but my IBS was still with me and as regular as ever. It hadn't gone anywhere. And in 2021, I began to see social media content from quite an intriguing character called Paul Saladino, MD. You may know the guy. He used to go under the tag of Carnivore MD. Now, the reason that he sort of caught my eye is he was talking about a diet that I hadn't tried, so that obviously the game was back on. But also he was talking about meat, and I'm a big meat eater, to the point where I'd actually worried about things like cholesterol, heart disease, just due to the amount of meat that I had sort of consumed over the years. Every weekend, for at least a decade, my barbecue was fired up, and it would be graced with some of the finest cuts of meat you could ever find. But his message at the time really caught my ear, because it was that red meat and organs had been really unfairly demonized over sort of 50 to 70 years, due specifically to a known corruption case in medical academia. Now, he also stated that it is in fact the most nutritionally dense bioavailable food source on the planet, and it made complete sense. It's full of all of these nutrients. It's very similar to our biology. Obviously, it's going to be good for us. And actually, he even argued that it was essential for all of us if we wanted to achieve optimum nutrition. Now, this naturally piqued his suspicions, and as such, he kind of went down this really deep, dark rabbit hole on the subject. And what he found was quite literally earth-shattering, and it had the same effect with me. So if you're not aware, back in the 1950s, the sugar industry bribed 5 world-renowned Harvard scientists. They paid around about $50,000 to $55,000 to each of them, so that they would falsify medical research into the causes of heart disease. In, I suppose, a very similar way to the tobacco industry previously, they had paid for those scientists from Harvard to state that red meat was the main driver for heart disease and that sugar was blameless. Now, those studies themselves, they weren't controlled. They relied upon self-reporting. It wasn't just people eating red meat. They were eating all kinds of things, smoking, drinking. None of that was confirmed. And if I'm completely honest, even if you removed the corruption, there's no way they would stand up to peer review today. Now, many of you might be sat there saying, conspiracy theorist, and shouting at your phone. But here is the real kicker. This was actually exposed, and each of those Harvard scientists were criminally charged for their actions. However, 70 years later, their clearly falsified and highly flawed research is still cited by doctors, GPs, and even expert nutritionalists from around the globe. It's not even hard to find. This information is actually online. It's one of the clearest examples you'll ever see of how to lie in plain sight, and actually a very worrying kind of insight into the lack of critical thinking that the majority of the population engages in. And up to a few years ago, that would have included me. You know, you're told that red meat's bad for you. I think red meat's bad for me. I'm worried about heart disease, which I shouldn't be. Now, I'm actually currently writing a detailed podcast episode on the subject of basically the documented and known corruption within the sort of medical research industry at every single level. So we won't go into that now. So let's get back to the story. So to cut a long story short, after discovering Paul Saladino's work and spending a good few months doing my own sort of due diligence, obviously I had to break some indoctrination. I decided to ignore all of that fear porn that I'd been fed over the years, and I decided to go full carnivore just to see how it went. Now, the very least I thought I would use it as kind of an elimination diet, because obviously I had these gut issues I needed to get to the bottom of. Let's just start eating meat, and then I could see how that went. And if that went well, I could then monitor any foods that I chose to reintroduce just to see how well I tolerated them. And at this stage, I'm going to be honest, I still was of the complete belief that digestive issues like mine were all diet related, something I now know to be completely untrue, but more on that as we progress. So I heard many anecdotal stories of people that were switching over to carnivore and they were losing like literally hundreds of pounds. They were clearing up lifelong autoimmune disease, reversing type 2 diabetes, many other acute and chronic illnesses too, migraines, asthma, ADHD, and even autism seemed to be quite a big one around carnivore and keto. And obviously digestive issues were very prominent on that list too. Now, one issue that I knew from the start I was going to have to contend with, or potentially, is one of the known side effects early on in sort of adopting this way of eating. Now, often during your adjustment period, say the first month, you can often suffer with explosive and pretty immediate diarrhea. And obviously, as an IBS sufferer that was trying to deal with this, it was obviously a big concern. But I'd got to a point that I didn't want this anymore. And if that was the side effect I was going to have to sort of suffer, I chose to bite down on my gum shield and take that temporary pain. So I began my journey, and within the first 10 days, everything settled. I very quickly felt the benefits. I felt a lot more energized throughout the day. My testosterone levels went up to a much more optimized level, as did my mineral and vitamin levels, because I was having my bloods done. My skin looked amazing, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel lethargic throughout sort of workouts. I'd always struggled with workouts, just sort of remaining consistent, but I was pushing my limits, and I actually felt quite strong. My productivity went up, as did, I suppose, because of my outlook, I think. Before, when I was doing content creation and stuff, I would record videos, podcasts. I'd record loads for social media and then convince myself of all the reasons not to share them. And I was recording and sharing stuff without even thinking about it. I had a real good clarity around it, sort of massively improved that. And then 2 weeks in, the dreaded diarrhea arrived. No dramas. I told myself I wanted to keep myself calm. It was only temporary. Just be consistent. You'll get through this. The other side, a completely different person. I was really sort of convinced it was going to be a temporary thing because it was happening as predicted by many other people that had done this. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. While I did experience a few sustained periods of recovery and the other benefits did continue, I just kept falling back until eventually, about 6 months in, my IBS was as bad as it had ever been. And I'm going to be honest, I was completely devastated. At this point, I had run out of ideas. I'd run out of diets, pills, potions. There were very few practices that I had to sort of continue to try out. But it was around about this time that I began to go really, really deep with my mindfulness practice due to my improved sort of clarity. Every day I was waking up at sunrise. I was getting my feet into the earth's surface, grounding. I was watching the sun come up, starting that circadian rhythm, and I was practicing my breath work. But I was also practicing breath work multiple times a day, both personally. I was doing it before bed throughout the day as well to balance myself, but also as my coaching business started to pick up, as I had obviously certified and I'd become a breathwork coach. So naturally that went through the roof, my activity there. My meditation had improved, and I was looking at every single modality that I could find just to improve health, longevity, and just hope that it would in some way affect the IBS. Now, it was at this point that suddenly my learnings on the nervous system and that physiology and the gut-brain connection really sort of kind of clicked into place. It was like a penny had dropped. I'd found the final piece to the jigsaw, and I could see this detailed picture of all the systems I had been deep diving, how they interact with one another, and I kind of had this eureka moment. And I'm going to be honest, I was both excited but also completely confused. As soon as I had that final piece of the jigsaw, the path was easy for me to see, and anybody that's even got an intermediate understanding of the nervous system and how it controls so many important systems in the body, I would go as far as to say that it was kind of obvious. It was kind of common sense. Yet nobody in established medicine was talking about it. So I was kind of thinking, am I some kind of evil genius? Not evil genius. Am I some kind of genius, or was there, I don't know, something more sinister going on? So what was my discovery? Let's tell you. Well, when you look at the pathology of most common acute and chronic illnesses, they're either a direct or indirect downstream result of a prolonged nervous system imbalance. Now, it's not necessarily the direct and obvious cause, but in almost every case, it serves as the foundational spark that leads to the onset of these conditions. And my rationale was, if you treat that initial spark, all of those downstream effects would kind of deal with themselves. And it would make it a lot easier for you to sort of take on that condition. Now, I started to implement this with my my sort of coaching clients, and the results blew my mind. In almost every case, within the first 2 weeks of their 6-week course, we were already seeing like massive changes. So I decided to really change my approach to sort of match this. And they weren't minor sort of improvements either. In many cases, we were already seeing either a complete reversal, or at the very, very least, a dramatic reduction in the symptoms they were seeing me for. That included IBS, depression, anxiety, autoimmune disease, breast cancer, burnout, migraine, trauma, and many more. But it just gives you an idea on how far-reaching these modalities were. Now, my success rate was already very high, but since that time, it's now around 100%. Every client I've dealt with has reversed their issues, and at the time of writing, these improvements have been permanent, and most have gone on to take it even further. Now, everybody apart from me, my IBS really did seem incurable at this time. And I suppose I had a bit of a sort of a word with myself. I thought, realistically, how did I ever really expect to achieve success with this incurable issue when established modern medicine and their millions and millions of dollars and pounds had completely failed? While I was obviously disappointed, I did obviously think, well, at least now I can focus on helping others that are in need. And that's where my focus really went. However, I didn't need to worry. Due to my belief that IBS was diet related, naturally, all of my previous research had been regards to the microbiome. It had been in this kind of area. You know, I was kind of sort of looking at foods. I was looking at the digestive area. Now, I did know in my heart of hearts, in the back of my head, that I think that the nervous system and nervous system management would be the final key to containing this condition. But again, there had been something sort of bugging me on this. Now, again, I knew in my heart of hearts that nervous system management would be kind of the final key to sort of containing my condition, because I knew it was going to be fired off by this nervous system. But there had been something kind of bugging me for a long time. And I just decided to look into it. Now, there wasn't anybody else championing this this sort of theory, so it wasn't something I'd heard. But I just always had a feeling inside that there was a reason my IBS was so stubborn. And I don't know, I just thought it was something like a pathogen, a blockage, a bacteria. I don't know, a bacteria that was just there. That was really sort of flaring it up. So I decided to sort of deep dive into this. And there wasn't much information out there, but I found a few threads to pull on. Now, the first discovery I made was with regards to probiotics. I kind of knew this all along, but it's just yet another industry with genuine potential. a minuscule potential on a focused area. But obviously it's been jumped on by a lot of opportunists, those people with fancy branding, lovely Instagram pages, clever marketing, but mostly substandard products, or at least products that don't work on the things we're trying to fix. Now, another long story short, I actually decided to engage with a 60-day colon cleanse that I had found. It was an extremely expensive probiotic sort of formula, pro and prebiotic formula. But I just decided, I'd done a lot of research and everything seemed to point to this area in the colon and these particular bacteria. So I decided to do that. And I decided to do that at the same time as I started the final practice that I had sort of discovered, my new discovery, and that was autophagy fasting. Now, autophagy fasting really struck a chord with me because I'd always practiced intermittent fasting back in my younger adult years, just by complete accident, to be honest. And I'd always worried about any potential health implications. Now, I'm not talking about the unhealthy weekends that we've already covered. I knew they were unhealthy and they weren't good for me, but such was the nature of the industry I worked in, recruitment. It was very, very regular for me to work through lunch and return home at 9 o'clock at night. So it was very normal for me to only eat one meal a day. Now, back in my 20s, in my bachelor pad, my fridge was basically full of ribeye steaks, and I had my George Foreman on the side, and he was always there to save the day. But that was basically pretty much how I used to eat. Now, I'm currently writing a comprehensive guide into autophagy fasting, but just to surmise it for context in this article, at around 18 hours of fasting, every cell within your body reaches a stage of what we call autophagy. And what that means is they turn in on themselves and they begin to sort of scan for damage, debris, viral particles, bacteria, and any kind of pathogens. And then just like imagine little motorway maintenance crews, they then begin cleaning, clearing, repairing themselves from within. Now, fasting also allows a very, very specific healthy bacteria called Akkermansia to flourish within the microbiome. And this seems to have an influence on our weight, our food-seeking behaviors, and it's thought to have even an anti-obesity action in it. Now, unlike the majority of bacteria within your microbiome, Akkermansia do not grow on ingested food. They actually grow on mucus, and that's far more abundant when you have an empty stomach. So obviously they flourish when you're fasting. Now, this blew my mind. It really did. And I thought this would be a great way for me to sort of clear any potential negative bacteria or whatever it was that I may have had. So I decided to give that a try. Now, due to my history of missing meals, for me, it was quite easy to adjust to my new eating schedule. I just kept pushing back my lunch further and further until I got to one meal a day. And due to the IBS and the nutritional deficiencies, I had already kind of changed my diet from the carnivore to an animal-based. It can lead to deficiencies, the IBS I had. So I wanted to include certain things that I knew were going to replenish certain minerals and vitamins. So I was eating meat, fish, organs, animal products such as dairy, raw honey, goat's milk kefir, berries, papaya and melon at the time, and lots of cheese. Within 2 weeks, I physically felt changes within my digestive system. Now, I'm not talking about the changes I was talking about earlier. My gut felt almost as if a knot had been untied. My core felt relaxed. For anybody that's ever had IBS like I have, you tend to have this default posture of straining, and that's why quite a few people get hemorrhoids as a result of it. It's not very nice. It's very hard to explain, but your core feels out of control, and that's because the messages from your brain down to that part via the gut-brain axis have been drastically rewired. Now, these improvements noticeably continued over the next couple of months, and I'm happy to say have continued on that trajectory for the last 22 months. Now, obviously, I am aware that it can change in a heartbeat. You know, I've been on this road before thinking I'm recovered, then it comes back with a vengeance. However, something very different happened with this particular recovery. Like I say, not only did the symptoms subside, but I can actually feel the absence of whatever it was that was inside me causing it. Now, as always with my podcast, there's a lot to unpack here. That's a lot of information I've just hit you with. But here's just a quick highlight reel. Now, what was it that finally helped me to defeat the incurable? Well, obviously good habits across the board, good sleep, hydration, good nutrition, exercise, personal time, grounding, reducing stress. But the real silver bullet for me was none of those. Now, for most people suffering with common issues, I believe that those changes and having a deep understanding on your nervous system, in particular the intrinsic link to the breath, and then obviously practicing breathwork techniques alongside those other healthy habits I've mentioned will oftentimes be enough, I believe, to get you where you need to. However, when it comes to really stubborn issues with digestion, in particular bacterial issues like mine, I believe it was a combination of the animal-based diet, so obviously good, clean nutrition, that targeted colon cleanse, which was amazing, and it's something I'm going to do on a yearly basis moving forwards. But I also think the silver bullet was that consistent autophagy fasting. I think that finally kicked it into touch. Now, once the bacterial issue was gone and my microbiome had a chance to recover to where it should be, I think the breath work and general mindfulness has been more than enough to keep it at bay. And I think what was initially caused by a nervous system imbalance, I think that was the initial cause that sent me down that path. I think then very quickly became sort of inflammation, infection, bacteria, and then that resulting unhealthy microbiome. But once I relieved that issue, breath work really did do the rest. Now, I do still practice this way of eating the vast majority of my days. I still eat an animal-based diet. And I do tend to still do the autophagy fasting. I do listen to my body. If there's a time when I'm hungry, I will eat. I won't sort of force myself through it. And I continuously monitor my bloods as well. But 2 years almost, and these levels have always been healthier than ever. Now, what I've basically changed is I'm now eating a diet high in fat. And that's based on burning fat rather than sort of carbs and glucose. And the only negative about this, it seems funny, it seems counterproductive, eating fat, I've always struggled to keep weight on. And the only negative I've had is my default weight is now probably around about a stone lighter than my preferred minimum. But that's really only when I'm sort of measuring this on ego-based like aesthetics in mind. My face looks a bit more drawn. I look a little bit older than I did because I'm not as full, but I feel amazing. What are some good examples of that? Gone is the snooze button. I never snooze now. That's switched off completely from my phone. Gone is the 5 cups of coffee. Gone is brain fog, the procrastination that came along with it. Gone is missing exercise sessions. But more importantly, gone is the acid reflux. Gone is the nervous system imbalance. And gone is the incurable IBS. That was so destructive. Oh, actually, and also gone are the anxieties and kind of life restrictions that it sort of kind of led to. I don't have to worry about going out anymore and not being near a toilet. So what are your thoughts? Have you or do you currently suffer with any type of digestive issues or acute imbalance of any kind? Would you like to explore how I can help you to change that and in turn change your life? I really can. I'm doing it. We've got reviews coming out of our ears, which you can check for yourself. Don't take my word for it, but get in touch. And while I've got your attention, please help me to defeat the evil algorithm and give this episode a rating, a comment, a like, and a share on whichever platform you're listening. It really does help us, guys, and I'd really appreciate it. And also, I'd like to get some conversations going. It would be very, very interesting to get your thoughts. But if you haven't already, smash that like button, smash that subscribe button, and until next time, peace to you all.